So now we're going to call Paul Osterhaupt back to the stage, and he's going to lead up a panel. I hope you have all your questions ready for the panel. So let's have all the speakers come back and have a seat.
Thank you. You're already here. Take a seat. Yes, sir. Harriet, here you are. Jan, all right. This is low. Thank you. So we wanted we wanted to hold the questions for all the storytellers so we could sit up here together because each of us carries different perspectives of storytelling. Whether it's we tell our stories through media or through traditional attraction design or through art or cultural placemaking. So I'm going to start it off because I have some questions for this group of people, and then we'll open it up to you to ask some questions. We have about 20 minutes here. So, Harriet, are Eastern audiences different than Western audiences?
They absolutely are. I do think that Eastern audiences are very different from Western audiences. The way that Eastern audiences view the storytelling experience is more centered toward a group interaction than it is, more centered toward a family interaction than the Western audience. Western audiences are very interested in customized experiences. How does this affect me? What do I get out of this? These days, what I see, I'm a mother, and one of the things I see in my children that are in those later teenage years is that they all want, it's somewhat, I think our generation calls it selfish, but what they want to see is how something reacts to them, what they can cause to happen. And it's kind of a different way of learning than how we learned when we grew up. Eastern audiences do it for the common good. They want everybody to have the same experience, and whatever that experience is, they want it to be more of a group experience than the Western audiences, which are really interested in how they individually can affect some outcome.
Great, thank you very much. Jan, are you seeing any trends in storytelling that are changing the way we should be looking at the way we tell stories?
Generally?
Generally.
Storytelling itself is probably not changing, right? It's like, a story works in the same way as it has like 100 or 1,000 years ago. I think there are, of course, contemporary changes in how we enjoy media, how we enjoy a story, and I think this is mostly driven currently by, I see this mostly in China, driven by social media and the viewing habits, right? The one thing that I realize very often in our office is that I hear someone watching a soap opera on the toilet. And this is a viewing habit, I think. This is something that's not a joke. This is something we have to take as something as media creators that makes sense, right? It's people watch shorter forms of media, and so also the stories have to be adjusted. So I think this is probably what I see in China, the biggest trend is shorter forms, binge watching complete episodes. We have worked on TV shows in China that had 60 episodes instead of just 12 in the West. So
great,
probably going there.
Thank you. Louis, with the work that you're doing on the Chinese project, have you found, or could you dispel any myths in how Westerners see Chinese audiences or how the Chinese see Western storytellers? I've heard, people say, well, Chinese people don't like to do this or they do like to do that. Are any of those myths that you heard, or maybe they're not myths, that you could say, this part is not true, this part is true?
Yeah, well, I think your presentation in particular spoke of the importance of once you capture an audience, it doesn't matter whether they're from China or any place else. People are people if you can engage them and come up with a good story. And I think stories are the hook to do it. Jan mentioned the immensity of the Chinese cultural heritage with all the stories, and you said something very interesting about, in some ways, and I had a discussion at lunch over this, I believe that in China, they're very respectful of these historic figures, so much so that they've turned them into archival, non-living beings. And the trick in China is to take away, and this has to do with the appropriateness of something, you taking so much risk, and admiring the authenticity of the material you're working with. But if you can break away some of the traditional constraints for a character, and I'm speaking specifically at lunch, we spoke of Monkey King. You have, Monkey King could be walking down the street. He's alive now. He's here. He might have a funny haircut and be wearing blue jeans with holes in them, and have bare feet, and be listening to Joey Ramone. He's here. And I feel the one thing that is a constraint is if you take, when you're looking at cultural heritage, if you lock into, it's not a museum, if you have to make it living, and your stories should make them live. And so
Great.
I'm happy you brought that up when you talked about it too, that they're not alive.
I'm sorry, I was checking my email. I didn't really pay attention.
That's fine. Yeah.
What are we going to do about this?
Well, is it any different from this?
Yeah.
At the end of the
Do
day,
we find this a problem in the way we tell stories, the way we capture audiences? Because we all know here, if you don't capture your audience at the very first part of your show, you're never going to catch them, right? So are we doing things differently? Are you thinking about doing things differently because of this? Are you embracing this because we know we're never going to get it out of their hands? So maybe we should just say it's going to be part of the show. Thoughts?
Well, I think that what we're all thinking about is that, oh, we're all pissed off at our kids because everybody's on their phones, but what are they doing? They're Instagramming photos of what they're doing to other people. So we can break that narrative now is to give people enough of, if we can create experiences where they can all be together and have those experiences together, virtually or not virtually, coming to a theme park for it, or if somebody is in one of these attractions and we can connect them to somebody else in a different place, that's where they're going to have fun. That's what they do now. I'll never forget, I was so upset with one of my kids, and he was on the computer, he had been on the computer for hours. And he's yelling and he's shouting and he's having a good time and he's playing a game or whatever. And I said, God, why don't you just go, Brandon is just up the street, just go up there and play with him. And he turned around and he shouted to me and he said, I am playing with him.
yeah.
And in that moment, I thought, oh, the world has changed for them, because it doesn't matter if his best friend is in the room with him or not. So getting the phone out of their hands is maybe not what we should be going for.
Great answer. If we have questions, we can bring them down unless they've been already dropped on my lap. I want to make this panel a little different. I want to ask the audience a question, especially people that are Chinese. How would it go over? I'm going to kind of make up a scenario here. If I, as a Westerner, said, I have an idea, let's make Monkey King babies. Like the characters of Monkey King, what if they were all children? How would that go over? Just raise your hand if you have a thought about that. Because I thought Monkey King is obviously very well known, very well respected. It's not really a religious icon, but it is, everybody has their own version of Monkey King. And even though there's hundreds of different versions of him, I think it's how, as Westerners, how should we approach those kinds of issues? Okay, go ahead.
I have a thought. I'm actually involved in both the attraction business and also the animation business. Most Chinese stories, they focus on the consequences of a behavior or who you are. For example, the Monkey King. If you behave like that, eventually you will become punished by the upper class, like the gods. So I think I agree with Louis that you have to renovate the idea of that Monkey King into a new person, so that it is much cooler and with a happier ending. So it depends on the audience. I think it depends on the audience who you're targeting. If you're targeting the small children, you probably want to figure out what they're thinking right now. If you're targeting someone like my age, you would probably go to the we would say we have a lot of independent designers. They will go to the national trendy sort of thing. We call it today in Chinese. We call it 国潮, sort of that. You probably want to take a look in that area. So I think it matters not that much whether it's a baby or not. It matters much more who you're targeting and what kind of figure they want and what kind of things that they're pursuing. And we combine that idea with the Monkey King character, and that's it. We don't really have to look into those stories. And I've watched a lot of Lion King and Beauty and the Beast stuff. We know that there's always they lived happily ever after. But if you read a lot of the Chinese stories, there are none happy ever after kind of thing. You know, there's a consequence. There's a consequence at the end of each story. If you are always yelling, the wolf is coming, then nobody will believe you. Nobody will believe you that the real wolf is coming. You know, there's always a consequence and a punishment at the end of each story. So it's pretty much negative. And that's the way how Chinese parents intend to educate their children in a more negative way, right? Passive way. So, yeah. So you got to understand that part. That's my point.
Great answer. Thank you very much. Thank you. The panel here, what was the most challenging story that you ever had to tell? How did you resolve that? Any thoughts about that? Or was there a situation where you couldn't make the story work for some reason? You just couldn't make it work? You're all experts. Get it right the first time.
Well, I think in any, the most challenging projects that I've done are the education projects. Changing people's behavior is extremely difficult, especially when it's long ingrained, and especially nowadays when some of the behaviors have real life consequences. I worked on a museum called the Las Vegas Springs Preserve a few years ago, and the goal of the museum was to try to get people to save water, because Lake Mead, a reservoir that feeds all of Las Vegas, was, I forget the number, but it was decreasing by like a quarter of the volume every year, and they were going to run out of water within a decade. So the government funded a museum we had a bunch of interactives, and, you know, we had one e-ticket attraction in there, and the whole point was to try to educate people to alter their behavior, because it's critical. We're not going to have fresh water anymore. And we did the best we could. You know, we hired great designers and great software programmers, and you know, we created a really great e-ticket attraction about, you know, what would happen if, in a negative way, if we didn't take care of this problem now. And I'm not sure that we reached the goal. I'm not sure that, you know, the water usage in Las Vegas hasn't really changed that much. So, you know, socially, the government has had to do it. The government has had to say, you know, okay, well, now you only get 50 gallons per head a day, or 35, or whatever it is. So education, I think,
Was tough.
That's the toughest one for us. And, you know, when we're all in that industry, it's, you know, entertainment is one thing, but education, which is really what we have to face up to next, is hard.
The responsibility in the end that we feel, right? It's like, in the end, it's like, I think as someone who's creating media in any format, I think you're never really happy with the story. You always feel like there's something more you could have done or something you could have improved. but then it's probably the projects that matter, where it's
Yeah.
most difficult to at one point just say, okay, that's what we can do. Right?
My specialization in my career has been the scenic arts, painter, and not a storyteller necessarily, but when you paint, you are storytelling with pigments, ultimately, and you always have this impression of the madcap writer, and he types the thing. Oh, this doesn't work. I'm going to fold it up and throw it away. And I can tell you, there's many times you would be working on a backdrop, and you would be doing a large underpainting for 40-foot by 80-foot backdrop that's going to the Los Angeles Opera or something like that. And what I've learned, or if you're directing the scenic arts and how to finish a theme park, Hollywood Boulevard for Universal Studios, or the New York streets, or Diagon Alley, the murals and the painted finishes, those are all stories. What I have learned and what I tell people that I'm working with, that I don't condone painting it out and starting over. I believe everything is incremental, that your failure is actually an opportunity, and that you work on top of those failures. And instead of going backwards and saying, I'm going to start over, you continue forward. And I think it spreads even into society that we don't want to regress. And I think there's a big fear of regression. And that's a story too. It's our story. Let's keep moving forward. So
Great, thank you. I didn't see any cards. I didn't know if anybody wanted to raise something up. If not, I'll ask our panelists for what advice they would give some of the younger designers here, if there's no questions. But we want to hear from you. This is a dialogue. This is how it works. No? Okay. All right. Then I'm going to ask the question. I want each one of you to give your best advice to. We have a great mix of experienced people and young people here. What advice would you give them, the young people particularly, because the old people don't care? Young people, something you've learned that would be beneficial to pass on.
for my part, I think it's really important that people do not try to abandon things that they've already experienced, that they build on their experiences rather than have this idea that you can throw it all away and start fresh. Every growth, it's one cell after the other that we grow up. And for designers, maintain your passion, learn from your mistakes. More than learning from your mistakes, use your mistakes, because those mistakes are unique to you, and they will help create your personal identity. So,
Thank you. Perfect. Jan?
Well, I still feel young, so I don't think I should give advice. But I would agree. I think it's all about fail as fast as you can,
Okay.
right? And then get up and do it again.
Yeah, great.
That's how you learn.
Oh, it's listen to the children because they know not what they say. That sense of wonder that starts when we're little needs to continue. That's what I would tell everybody.
Okay. Well, then, since I'm the moderator, I'll get the last word in. Learn as quickly as you can how to separate your art from yourself. So when some idiot art director or creative director comes in and says, I don't like that, because we're artists, we take it as, well, this is an extension, my art is an extension of me, so obviously you don't like me. And that's not true at all. But it's hard for us as artists to separate something that comes from our soul. We have to put on a piece of paper or on a screen. So try and separate your art from your person, and I think you'll have a better, happier life. And I want to thank the three tremendous panelists for sharing your insights with us this afternoon. And I think we'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you all. Wow, wasn't that fantastic? The whole morning has really been something special. We're going to take a break now,